Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Saturday, July 20th, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about the Donald Trump campaign. Now, before this video gets started, I wanted to briefly address my absence over the past week. I've been posting pretty infrequently, and I wanted to say that that is because I was in the Philippines visiting family. I was working 12 hours ahead of time, so I was up at 3 a.m. recording some of these videos to get them out around 3 p.m. Our time, and so it actually just became very difficult. I hate to say it though, but the past 10 days have arguably been probably the most important 10 days of this entire election cycle. And so being out of the United States, not really on the ground in Washington, D.C., which is where I am for the summer, it was very difficult trying to cover some of these things. And honestly speaking, I missed a lot of news and wasn't able to cover it fully as much as I would want to. So been traveling in all the wrong times. The first debate, I was traveling, wasn't able to make a video till the day after, and now I've just been gone, practically speaking, for the past 10 days, uploading infrequently. So I really apologize for that one, but I'm here in the United States for the foreseeable future, likely through the election, and so that's where we're at. So moving on, beyond my own personal endeavors outside of the United States, let's focus on what's happening in the United States with the Donald Trump campaign and Vice President Kamala Harris, who is now being floated as a potential replacement nominee for President Biden in the 2024 election. Now, the other thing I wanted to address in the beginning of this video was stating that from the very beginning, the Biden campaign has been adamant that President Biden is not at all interested in any speculation or conversation around his departure from the race. President Biden, what we know about him is that when push comes to shove, he digs in. He refuses to listen to the mainstream media, to mega donors, to elites, and arguably even, based on what we've been seeing too, some of the polling data that we've been seeing that should, in theory, make President Biden, in some ways, amenable to dropping out of the race. Now, that is just theory. In American politics, things are very different because not everything works the way that polls actually say. Not everything is dictated by what polls are saying or what donors are saying or what the media is saying. And while there is, of course, many moving parts of this election, one thing has been very clear. President Biden is not dropping out of the race. Until we see otherwise, everything about this really is speculation, which can sort of allude to the reason why I haven't been making that many videos discussing the Kamala Harris swap-in, potential, changes in campaign style or rhetoric. Something like this, though, is much more major. It's outside of the Twitterverse. It's outside of the mainstream media punditry. It's outside of CNN and MSNBC and Fox News. It's coming directly from the campaign. The Biden campaign has done their own sort of internal polls, figuring out, okay, is Vice President Harris actually a better nominee for Democrats? What are we seeing on the inside? Talking to mega donors, talking to a bunch of people in the Democratic Party. The Trump team now is gearing up for a potential Kamala Harris-Donald Trump matchup in the 2024 election, and I wanted to unpack that here today. Now, just around a week and a half ago, I made an election prediction between Vice President Harris and former President Trump, in which former President Trump defeated Vice President Harris 291-247. Now, I'd say this map roughly holds true today. Post-assassination attempt, post-RNC, we really haven't seen much movement in any direction, and arguably speaking, this country is already polarized enough that it probably won't be shifting too heavily between now and November, even if it means that Kamala Harris ends up winning, meaning you'll probably see a state like Wisconsin and Pennsylvania flip, and at most that brings Kamala Harris across the finish line. But other than that, right, you're not going to see major shifts. States like Texas aren't going to go, Ohio's not going to go, Colorado's not going to go red. These states are pretty much solid for Democrats and Republicans based on where they are right now. So with Kamala Harris at 247 to 291, she actually does better than Joe Biden in a head-to-head matchup. But I would say, arguably speaking, they don't exactly reach the same bounds. What that means is that Kamala Harris's high point might be different than Joe Biden's high point, and the low points arguably can be different as well. But I'm not focused on a Kamala Harris-Donald Trump matchup. I just wanted to say that, this is something that has been very much in contention and also can help explain why the Trump campaign might be preparing for an attack plan against Kamala Harris in the event that Joe Biden withdraws from the race. Because what we've been seeing as the mainstream media narrative here is that Kamala Harris would do better than President Biden. Whether that's actually proven to be true, I would say that the polling data indicates that she performs ahead by roughly 0.8 or 0.9% better nationwide and across swing states. I don't personally believe that that is a high enough mark or threshold to cross to say absolutely there is no circumstance in which Kamala Harris does worse than Joe Biden, because I think there is a circumstance. I equally think there's a circumstance in which she does better. But as of right now, there doesn't seem to be a consistent level of indication on my end that would say Kamala Harris should be swapped out for President Biden for the sake of electability until we start to see more consistent data, because it's pretty much been all over the place. But the Trump team might see it differently. So I'm not going to have you, get bored by going through this entire article. I decided to summarize it, and we're going to go through some of the major points because the Trump team is looking at this from arguably a very strong point in terms of political perspective. They're not looking at this from the lens of, Kamala Harris might move up. Let's go ahead and just treat this as if this is a situation that is plan B, plan C. They're understanding a lot about what Kamala Harris can bring forth to a ticket, something like a Democratic ticket around abortion, reproductive rights, things along those lines that the Trump team and the Republican Party in general just simply cannot win on, govern on, or be elected on correctly. And so, understanding this, the Trump campaign is preparing a major attack plan against Vice President Harris. What this looks like is opposition research, looking at advertisements, doing polling around Kamala Harris, employing Republican pollsters to see, is Harris actually a better candidate? Where are Harris's weak points? What can the Trump team target her on? They're going practically full force on Kamala Harris in preparation that she might be the eventual presidential nom, and no longer the VP nom. On the note of VP noms, they're also starting to gather opposition research on people like Governor Josh Shapiro and Governor Andy Beshear and Governor Roy Cooper. 3 governors, LOL. But looking at it, seriously, they're looking at Kentucky. They're looking at North Carolina. They're looking at Pennsylvania because these are the names that have been floated by mega Democratic donors, people that are on the inside, and the Trump team is not going to let anything go to fault. If Kamala Harris was to pop out tomorrow with a Harris-Beshear ticket, they would have an ad ready. They would have tweets ready. They would have what they needed to do to take down a Democratic ticket. That's what they're doing. And this also sort of speaks to a point about why Kamala Harris really coming into this, is someone who hasn't been as extensively vetted as President Biden. I mean, if you look back at 2008, you can see that election went pretty well for Democrats. While Joe Biden had his fair share of gaffes, fair share of, bad moments, and yet Barack Obama and Joe Biden ended up doing quite fine. The reason I mentioned the 2008 election is because this was the first time in the decades-long experience that Joe Biden had in the U.S. Senate, he had finally gotten onto a presidential ticket as the VP. And he was vetted by the Obama campaign, vetted by Republicans. Opposition research was gathered, used, and weaponized, and it fell flat. In 2012, they had the Obama campaign Obama administration to attack on, fell flat. Obama-Biden won re-election. Then in 2016, decided to bow out of the race after initially exploring a potential presidential bid, decided not to run, and then in 2020, won the presidency. Again, opposition research was gathered, attacked, vetted, etc. Someone who people had decades to gather experience. The first time Joe Biden announced a bid for the presidency was in 1988, decades long of experience to attack President Biden, and eventually, again, also fell flat. And so Biden is someone who has been extensively vetted, extensively researched. I mean, we have seen it to the likes of no end. 2 vice presidential campaigns, multiple presidential campaigns, a winning presidential campaign, and 4 years of a White House administration under constant media surveillance. It's exactly why a lot of the attacks on Trump from 2016 and 2020 are moot points now, because new things need to be brought up. With Kamala Harris, it's a whole new ballgame. The Trump team knows that, and so they're looking for more and more information. She wasn't as extensively researched as the person at the top of the ticket, because what they know and what we know from history is that people rarely vote on who you choose as VP. It is rarely a major factor in any presidential election, and the ones where it matters the most arguably could be this one. So the Trump team gearing up for people like Governor Roy Cooper, gearing up for people like Governor Josh Shapiro. The Trump team is also very aware that if Biden was to step down, it has to be Kamala Harris. They talk about here that there would be potential division should Joe Biden step down too, specifically amongst black voters, a base that Kamala Harris would need to drive up turnout tremendously, the same thing with Joe Biden, in order to win this election, and the same goes for any Democrat, potentially tapping into any fracturing within the party, any Democrats on, in different parts of the country that might feel betrayed by national leadership as they start to see more news stories about pushing out President Biden. There are diehard Biden supporters out there that might feel disenfranchised before the election and may find themselves less likely to vote in November. As crazy as it sounds that there might be voters out there that are locked in on Biden today that might not vote in November if it's somebody else, there are voters like that who do in fact exist. And the Trump team mentions that, and they know that, and they're going to utilize that to weaponize it against Kamala Harris or whoever, if there's another circumstance in which it's somebody else besides Kamala Harris, takes on the role for president of the United States. Overall, the Trump team has been looking at this and really taking a step back, trying to understand Kamala Harris for who she is as a candidate, who she is as a person, because the reality in which Kamala Harris does in fact become the presidential nominee probably hasn't changed in terms of overall percent chance, but is something that people are talking about far more. And the Trump team honestly seems like it just wants to get ready. It's another reason, too, that they don't want to debate J.D. Vance against Kamala Harris. I genuinely believe Republicans are afraid of Kamala Harris on a debate stage. She knows how to hold her own far better than President Biden. She's more articulate. She comes across more eloquently. And that's exactly what you find in a VP nom in contrast. Remember 2016? Mike Pence. What terms were used to describe him? Civil, eloquent, presidential. He was the VP nom. No one in years past looked at this and said that the VP nom needs to come into this as the better debater, or someone who is stronger, or someone who can prove themselves to be worthy of stepping into the role of president, with very limited exceptions. Only in times did we talk about it with John McCain and Sarah Palin, or Ronald Reagan, because at the time he was the oldest elected or re-elected president of the United States. Those were causes for concern back then, and in far and infrequent situations. In this election, it's practically everything. And if Kamala Harris hits it out of the park, either on the presidential debate stage or the vice presidential debate stage, it helps the Democratic ticket. And right now, Republicans are stalling. They're trying to prevent any change in the electoral map makeup right now, because President Trump is arguably doing the best he has ever done in the entirety of the 2024, 2020, or 2016 elections. Donald Trump leads for the first time nationally since before the 2016 presidential election. That was the last time that Donald Trump ever had a lead over a Democratic contender, and it was just a point lead over Hillary Clinton after the RNC. And that was in 2016. I mean, you're talking about years ago. 8 years ago was the last time that Donald Trump maintained a national lead. The problem for Democrats today is that over the past year, Donald Trump has maintained a lead over Joe Biden to no fault. Very few and limited exceptions in which Biden actually reclaimed the lead. Just for 2-3 days on FiveThirtyEight, but on Real Clear Politics and the New York Times, Donald Trump again has maintained a constant lead against Joe Biden. For the first time ever, we've seen Republicans do this well, and it does not bode well for the incumbent president. And so we're finding Biden is not doing well in the polls. Trump team is realizing that might be a reason as to why that Kamala Harris might swap in. And they also mentioned here too that the Trump team has been pulling back on some of their attacks on President Biden surrounding his age, surrounding the debate performance. I mean, we watched this debate. If you watched the debate, you know there were many parts in which the Trump team and the Biden team have been pulling away for advertisements. They pulled away Trump's comments around different things, pulled away Biden's comments around different things. And you're finding that these things are making their way into mainstream media conversation, into advertisements, but we have yet to see strong and heavy campaigning against Biden from the right in terms of the debate performance. The Trump team and Donald Trump himself have been largely absent from our political conversation over the past 10 days. And that's not without intention. The Trump team knows what it does when they allow the media to do the job for them. The speculation around Joe Biden's dropping out of the race only proves to the average voter that some people don't have confidence in the president of the United States. When more Democrats issue statements calling for President Biden to step down and he refuses to step down, it's going to be really hard for many of those Democrats to 180 in a month from now after the convention and say we're all in and locked in for Joe Biden. This election for Democrats needed to be a referendum on President Trump. But for all intents and purposes right now, it seems to be not that. And Democrats really desperately want to turn it around into that, because that's arguably what this election was meant to be in the first place. When Donald Trump announced his bid to run for election in 2024, he did so immediately after the 2022 midterms. And Democrats realized that, hey, maybe we can run Biden again, and Biden could potentially win given the last election. But things have seemingly gone farther off the deep end than what Democrats would have hoped. They're not doing well in the polls. Fundraising numbers really aren't showing what they need to show. And just generally speaking, what we've seen from the Trump team is a more measured and more electable ticket than what we saw in 2016 or even in 2020. And as outlandish as some of the comments that President Trump made on the RNC stage, as outrageous as some of the comments the Trump team has made surrounding election, quote-unquote, integrity or immigration, mass deportation now, different types of things, as much as it seems like Republicans are trying to lose this election, they are actually doing far better than they ever have in the past 2 election cycles. And that should terrify Democrats. But they aren't letting up yet. The Trump team, as much as they've been able to orchestrate a very strong performance for President Trump, they are now continuing this in the event that Kamala Harris takes up the nomination for president, which also shows a very big risk in running Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket. Because what the argument really has been is that Kamala Harris has not had a presidential stage, meaning she has room for improvement, which in theory could be correct, but she also has a lot more room to fall. Biden and Harris are roughly polling even. A point ahead for Harris, but some polls show her performing significantly worse than Joe Biden. The problem with this is that Joe Biden might be at his ceiling, but he could also be at his low point, and we don't exactly know. It's not a perfect science, and polling has never, ever been perfect when Donald Trump is on the ballot, or even in the past few election cycles, like at 2022 and 2020 and 2016. The Joe Biden campaign could be at a point where, because Kamala Harris has never been at the helm of the ticket, the opposition research doesn't land as well. The attacks don't land as well because she's shielded behind this Biden bench that voters may think 75% of this country believes that President Biden does not have the mental fortitude to move forward with another 4-year term, and yet in some of those polls, he's beating Donald Trump. There are voters out there that might agree with the statement, I don't believe Biden can serve out another 4-year term, and I expect him to resign 2 years in, but I still want him for another 4-year term because Donald Trump is just that bad. And it might be appealing to Democrats to look at it and say, well, Kamala Harris can articulate that point, and she's young. She doesn't have that age concern. She's pushing 60, which is not young, but, young in the sake of the context of all of which, never mind. This election, all of that stuff. I don't want to get into the coconut pill of this all. But really, genuinely speaking, that is the line of thinking on that end. But you have to understand the flip side. Maybe the reason why Kamala Harris is doing well is because she hasn't been running on the national level. Because in 2020 and 2019, she did not poll better than President Biden against Donald Trump amongst the same group of people. There were voters out there who said, I want Biden, but I want Trump against Harris. And those voters can absolutely still exist. It's a big risk, and we really don't know the outcome. Right now, Democrats aren't exactly winning, but they might lose with Kamala Harris by even more. They might throw away the House. They might throw away the Senate, but they could also win with Kamala Harris. In any instance, the Trump team is ready. The Trump campaign is gearing up these attacks, and it just shows just how real these considerations around VP Harris moving up to the presidential ticket actually are to Republicans, and why they might be worried. Dropping out of the VP debate, now moving into opposition research against her being the potential president, doing opposition research against random governors in the event that they might be chosen as Kamala Harris's VP. There's so much speculation. There's so much up in the air right now, but the Biden campaign has been very adamant, and I said this in the beginning, that Joe Biden is running for re-election, and he will be on the ballot in August at the convention, and he will be on the ballot this coming November. And that's something that voters are going to have to consider and take into account when they're looking at this year's election choices. Do they want Biden? Do they want Harris? Do they want Trump? Do they want Kennedy? There's so many different ways to look and really tackle this election. But what we know so far, it's a Trump versus Biden rematch until it's not. And then we get into a real, even more exciting and exhilarating and crazy election cycle that none of us could have expected a year ago. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch and then a playlist for my 2024 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.